I was in the middle of my morning shower when the water just stopped. Not a trickle, not a slow drip, completely dry. One second I'm washing shampoo out of my hair, the next second I'm standing there covered in soap suds with nothing coming out of the shower head. My first thought was a broken pipe. My second thought was the city water department doing maintenance. My third thought, after I wrapped myself in a towel and saw the bright orange notice taped to my front door, was that I was about to go to war with the Greenwood Estates HOA. The notice was printed on official letterhead with fancy borders and everything. Notice of utility service suspension, property owner non-compliance results in water service termination until further notice. Signed by Margaret Chin, HOA president, and dated yesterday. They cut off my water while I was asleep. Here's the thing about my house in Greenwood Estates. When I bought it 3 years ago, the biggest selling point wasn't the granite countertops or the two-car garage. It was the fact that I own my own well. The previous owner had drilled it in 1987 when the neighborhood was first being developed, and my property deed clearly stated that I had independent water rights. But 6 months ago the HOA decided that private wells were aesthetically inconsistent with community standards, and demanded that all residents connect to the new municipal water system they'd contracted with the city. The problem? The connection fee was $12,000, plus monthly fees that would triple my current water costs. I told them no. My well worked fine, it was legal and it was mine. That's when the harassment started. First came the violation notices. Apparently my well pump housing was visually disruptive. Never mind that it was behind my house and barely visible from the street. Then they cited me for non-standard utility infrastructure. Then failure to maintain community utility compliance. Each violation came with a fine. $50, then $100, then $250. I ignored them all because, legally speaking, they had no authority over my well. My water source predated their HOA bylaws by 15 years. But Margaret Chin wasn't interested in legalities. Last month, she'd shown up at my door with 2 guys in coveralls and clipboards. "David, we're here to discuss your water situation," she'd said, like she was doing me a favor. "There's nothing to discuss, Margaret. My well is legal and it's staying. The community has voted to standardize all utilities. You're the only holdout. The community can vote all they want. They don't own my well." That's when one of the coverall guys spoke up. "Sir, we're from Municipal Water Services. We've been contracted by the HOA to handle all residential connections in this area." "Great. Don't connect mine." Margaret's smile got tighter. "David, you're being unreasonable. This is about community standards and property values. This is about you wanting control over something you don't own." She'd left that day, but not before the coverall guys spent 20 minutes walking around my backyard, measuring distances and taking photos of my well equipment. I should have seen this coming. Standing in my bathroom, still dripping wet and covered in soap, I realized they'd actually done it. Somehow they'd managed to cut off my water supply. My own private well that they had no legal right to touch. I threw on some clothes and marched outside to check the well housing. The cover was off, and there were fresh tool marks around the electrical connections. They disconnected the pump sometime during the night. But here's what Margaret Chin didn't know about me. I'm an electrical engineer. I've spent 15 years designing power distribution systems for commercial buildings. I understand exactly how electricity flows through a community, where it comes from, and most importantly, how to stop it. And Greenwood Estates had a very interesting electrical setup. I called my lawyer first because I'm not stupid. My attorney, Patricia Wells, had handled my property purchase and knew the well situation. "David, they can't legally disconnect your private well. That's destruction of property. Can you get it turned back on? I can file for an emergency injunction, but that'll take a few days. In the meantime, you're without water." A few days without water because Margaret Chin decided to play hardball. I was done being nice. After I hung up with Patricia, I took a walk around the neighborhood. Not because I needed exercise, but because I needed to confirm something I'd suspected since moving here. Greenwood Estates was built in the late 80s when power infrastructure planning was still pretty basic. The entire subdivision, all 47 houses, the community center, the fancy gate system, everything was fed by a single electrical transformer. And that transformer sat on an easement that ran directly through my backyard. When I'd bought the house, the city had explained that I was responsible for maintaining access to the easement, but the land was still mine. The power company had rights to service their equipment, but they couldn't prevent me from using my property around it. More importantly, if there was ever a safety issue that required immediate power shutdown, the property owner could shut off the transformer in an emergency. I spent the afternoon researching electrical codes and safety regulations. By evening I had a plan. The next morning I was still without water. Margaret had ignored my lawyer's calls, and the HOA office said she was unavailable for comment. Meanwhile, I was buying bottled water and using the gym down the street to shower. That's when I noticed the landscaping crew working on the community center. They were using my outdoor water spigot to fill their tanks. Not only had the HOA cut off my water, they were still using it for their own projects. I walked over to the crew chief, a weathered guy in his 50s named Carlos. "Excuse me, that's my water you're using." Carlos looked confused. "The HOA lady said we could use any outside spigots in the neighborhood. Not this one. This comes from my private well." "Oh man, I'm sorry. We had no idea." Carlos was apologetic and immediately moved his crew to a different water source. But the fact that Margaret was still using my water while denying it to me was the last straw. I called the power company's emergency safety line. "Hi, this is David Martinez at 1247 Oak Lane in Greenwood Estates. I need to report a potential electrical hazard on the transformer easement on my property." "What type of hazard, sir?" "There's been unauthorized excavation near the transformer base, and I'm seeing some electrical arcing. I'm concerned about safety." This wasn't entirely a lie. The HOA's contractors had been digging around my well, which was only 30 feet from the transformer. And electrical arcing is always a legitimate safety concern. "Sir, we'll have a crew out there within 2 hours to assess the situation. Should I shut down power to the transformer as a precaution?" "If you're seeing active arcing, yes. Safety first. There should be a manual disconnect switch in the easement area." There was. I'd noticed it years ago but never thought much about it. A simple lever that could cut power to the entire neighborhood in case of emergency. An hour later, I walked out to the transformer and pulled the switch. 47 houses, the community center, the electronic gate system, the pool pumps, and the fancy LED street lighting all went dark instantly. Then I went inside to wait. The power company truck arrived 20 minutes later. 2 technicians in hard hats walked around the transformer, checking connections and looking for problems. I met them in my backyard. "Are you the homeowner who called this in?" "Yes, David Martinez. I was concerned about the excavation work near the transformer." They spent another 10 minutes examining the area where the HOA contractors had been working around my well. "Sir, we don't see any immediate electrical hazards, but this excavation work was definitely done without proper clearance." "Who authorized digging this close to the transformer?" "The HOA hired contractors to work on my neighbor's water system. I don't think they realized how close they were to the electrical equipment." The senior technician shook his head. "This should have been coordinated with us. We'll need to file a safety report and probably require the HOA to bring in a certified electrical contractor before we restore power." "How long will that take?" "Could be a few days depending on their contractor's availability." "Perfect." By noon my phone was ringing non-stop. First call was from a neighbor whose home office depended on electricity. Second call was from another neighbor whose elderly mother's medical equipment was plugged into the wall. Third call was from the community center manager whose computerized booking system had crashed. I answered the fourth call. It was Margaret Chin and she was furious. "David, I know you're behind this power outage." "Margaret, I have no idea what you're talking about. The power company said there was a safety issue near the transformer on your property." "Yes, I called them about some electrical problems I noticed." "Safety first, right? What kind of electrical problems?" "The kind that happen when people start digging around electrical equipment without proper permits." There was a long pause. "David, if you restore power right now, we can discuss your water situation." "Margaret, I don't control the power company. They said the neighborhood can't have electricity until the safety issues are resolved." "What safety issues?" "You'd have to ask them. Something about unauthorized excavation and electrical clearances." Another long pause. "How do we resolve this?" "Well, I imagine you'd need to hire a certified electrical contractor to examine the excavation work your people did near the transformer. The power company mentioned that might take a few days." I could hear Margaret breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Or," I continued, "you could restore my water service and I might be able to expedite the electrical safety review." "Are you blackmailing me?" "Margaret, I'm just a homeowner who's concerned about electrical safety in our neighborhood. Just like you're an HOA president who's concerned about water compliance." She hung up on me. An hour later she called back. "David, your water will be restored this afternoon." "That's great news, Margaret. I'll call the power company and let them know the excavation issues have been resolved." "How quickly can power be restored?" "I have no idea. You'd have to ask them. But of course, I knew exactly how quickly power could be restored. I walked out to the transformer and flipped the switch back on. 47 houses lit up simultaneously. Then I called the power company. "Hi, this is David Martinez again. The excavation issue has been resolved. The contractors have moved their equipment away from the transformer. Great, we'll send someone out to do a final safety check and restore power. Actually, I think power might already be restored. My neighbors are saying their lights are back on. Let me check our system. Yes, it looks like power was restored about 5 minutes ago. Sometimes these manual disconnects reset themselves when the safety issue is resolved. They don't reset themselves, but I wasn't about to correct him. That afternoon, my well pump was humming again and water was flowing through my pipes. Margaret Chin had kept her word. But I wasn't done with her yet. The next morning, I found a letter from the HOA in my mailbox. A formal apology for the water service interruption due to contractor error, and a notice that my violation fines had been waived, in the interest of community harmony. I also found something else interesting. A notice to all residents that the mandatory municipal water connection program had been postponed indefinitely pending further community input. Apparently, yesterday's power outage had given people time to think about how much control they wanted the HOA to have over their utilities. But Margaret Chin wasn't the type to give up easily. A week later she was back to her old tricks. This time, it was a citation for non-compliance with community landscaping standards. Apparently, my front lawn was half an inch too long according to the new grass height regulations they'd passed while I was distracted by the water issue. The fine was $500. I looked at the citation, then at my perfectly normal lawn, then at the transformer in my backyard. Some people never learn. I called the power company again. "Hi, this is David Martinez at 1247 Oak Lane. I'm seeing some concerning electrical fluctuations near the transformer on my property. The voltage seems unstable." "What kind of fluctuations, sir?" "Intermittent power variations. My lights have been flickering and I'm worried about damage to electronic equipment. We'll send someone out to check the transformer. Should I disconnect power as a precaution?" "If you're experiencing significant voltage fluctuations, yes. Better safe than sorry." I walked out to the transformer and pulled the switch again. This time I left it off for 6 hours. By the time Margaret Chin called me, she sounded defeated. "David, what's it going to take?" "What do you mean?" "To stop these power outages." "Margaret, I don't cause power outages. I report electrical safety concerns to the power company. And these safety concerns keep happening right after you get HOA violations. That does seem like an unfortunate coincidence. What do you want?" "I've been thinking about this since the first power outage. The HOA had been making my life miserable for months with ridiculous violations and illegal attempts to control my property. It was time to end this permanently. I want a written agreement that the HOA will never again attempt to regulate, control, or interfere with my well, my water usage, or any other private utilities on my property." "Fine. I want all previous violation notices declared invalid and removed from my file." "Fine. And I want a formal apology from the HOA board acknowledging that they overstepped their authority." "David, that's humiliating." "Margaret, you cut off my water illegally. You sent contractors onto my property without permission. You've been harassing me for months with fake violations. A little humiliation seems appropriate." There was a long silence. "And if I agree to all of this? Then I'll make sure the power company gets a thorough report on electrical safety in our neighborhood. I'm sure they'll find everything is up to code." "How do I know you won't just cause another outage next week?" "Margaret, I don't cause outages. But I will say this, as long as the HOA respects my property rights, I'm sure our neighborhood will have very reliable electricity." She agreed to my terms. 3 days later, I had a signed agreement acknowledging my complete autonomy over my utilities, a formal letter of apology from the HOA board, and a clean violation record. I also had something else: the respect of my neighbors who'd realized that standing up to HOA overreach sometimes requires creative solutions. The funny thing about bullies is that they usually back down when you hit them where it hurts. Margaret Chin had tried to control me through my water supply, thinking I'd cave under pressure. She hadn't counted on me controlling something she needed even more. 6 months later, Margaret Chin resigned from the HOA board. Apparently, the stress of dealing with difficult residents was affecting her health. The new board president, a reasonable guy named Tom Rodriguez, approached me about running for a board position myself. I declined. I had no interest in controlling my neighbors' lives. But I kept the emergency disconnect switch for the transformer clearly marked and easily accessible. just in case anyone else got ideas about whose property they could control. The neighborhood has been remarkably peaceful ever since. Turns out, when people know that aggressive HOA tactics might result in sitting in the dark for a few hours, they tend to prefer reasonable discussion and compromise. My well still pumps crystal clear water. My lawn is whatever height I want it to be. And my electricity bill includes a line item for neighborhood electrical safety coordination that always makes me smile. Margaret Chin learned that cutting off someone's water is only effective if they can't cut off your power. I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with unreasonable people is to be more unreasonable than they are. And everyone in Greenwood Estates learned that maybe, just maybe, they should think twice before messing with the guy who lives next to the transformer. The HOA cut my water, so I cut their power grid. In the end, I got my water back. They learned some respect for property rights, and the whole neighborhood got a lesson in how to handle bullies. Not bad for a simple electrical engineer who just wanted to keep his own well.